guys, welcome back to the Road to Success MCAT test prep series. This is my second video in my psychology subseries where I cover everything you need to know about the psychology subsection of the exam. This video is titled Consciousness, Attention, and Memory. I will be starting off by talking about sleep and dreams. After that, I will take a brief interlude where I talk about how drugs affect our body. And I'll wrap up this video with our meat and potatoes, which are attention and memory. These are very intense and deep topics, so I hope you guys pay attention and learn something useful today. And that being said, let's jump right into it and start talking about sleep and dreams.
Alright, first, let's start off with the concept of sleep. Our brain sends out various different waves, and they serve as an indication of the activity level occurring. Beta waves are the highest frequency wave, and they're associated with periods of wakefulness and alertness. Alpha waves occur during daydreaming. Theta waves occur during stages of early sleep and drowsiness, while delta waves are associated with deep sleep and comas. Now, let's move on to those different sleep stages. There are 5 stages with different waves. In N1 stage, theta waves are going to be dominating. Hallucinations and the Tetris effect occur in this stage. N2 sleep is dominated by theta waves as well. And this is where sleep spindles and K complexes will be observed. I'll show you what they look like in the next slide. But for now, let's focus on N3 and N4, which are essentially the same stage. I'm not sure why the MCAT differentiates, but they're both dominated by delta waves. Delta waves, I'll write delta here too. These stages are characterized by sleepwalking and sleep talking. Finally, I'm going to talk about REM sleep, REM sleep. This stage is going to be where dreams occur, as well as memory consolidation. Surprisingly, even though this is a sleep stage, alpha and beta waves are dominating this stage. So this is something that's been confusing scientists for a very, very long time. Now, you can see right here, this is how our brain waves look. Right here, you can see the sleep spindles. This is probably the only one that you absolutely have to know, like, a pattern. So try and look at this, memorize any sort of pattern you can see. With that, moving on, let's move on to dreams. We don't really know what the purpose of dreams are, but we have a few theories about what they mean. The concept of evolutionary biology claims that dreams are a biological process used for tasks such as problem solving and threat preparation. A major theory originating from Dr. Sigmund Freud, who believed that dreams have a literal part, or manifest content, and an underlying meaning, or latent content. So, for example, if you dream of a monster chasing you, that will be manifest content. While an underlying fear of something in your life creeping up on you in the near future, that could be the meaning of your dream, which would be the latent content. Now, let's move on to sleep disorders. Insomnia is the one we're most familiar with, which is basic lack of sleep. You can't fall asleep. Narcolepsy, on the other hand, is the opposite. The patient will be randomly falling asleep at inopportune times, in public. Sleep apnea is when you stop breathing during your sleep, so you'll be waking up. And sleepwalking and sleep talking are basically self-explanatory. They mostly occur during N3 sleep. Alright, I love teaching this topic because students always seem to grasp it very quickly. Maybe it's because it's taboo. I don't know. But anyway, here's drugs. We can split drugs into 3 different tiers. Depressants slow down your body, and they lower your neural activity by activating GABA receptors. Stimulants, on the other hand, they're doing the opposite by increasing your neural activity and activating dopamine and serotonin. I'm going to abbreviate serotonin as 5-HT because if you've ever read a psychology research paper or anything in your psychology textbooks, you'll know that the shorthand for serotonin, the official term, will be 5-HT. That being said, hallucinogens alternate your perception and they cause you to hallucinate. Memorize which tier each of these drugs are in and you should be fine. I do want you guys to know of a special link between alcohol and benzodiazepines. Sorry, not alcohol and benzodiazepines, alcohol and barbiturates. Yeah, if you ever take these together, you die. So that's something the MCAT wants you to know. They'll usually give it to you in the passage, but if there's ever like you get a pseudo discrete question, just know that that's a unique interaction between these two. So drug entry isn't super high yield, but you should know that oral is the slowest route, while injection is the fastest. The oral is the slowest. Injection is the fastest. Keep in mind that oral is about like 20 minutes or something, while injection is almost instant. The reward pathway, this is high yield, so pay attention. Note that the ventral tegmental area, or the VTA, it creates dopamine and it sends it to the amygdala. The nucleus accumbens, prefrontal cortex, hippocampus, all of those. These are the areas of the brain that control your emotion, motor function, attention, and memory, respectively. The last part about drugs that I want to talk about is going to be tolerance and withdrawal. When one is exposed to drugs over a long period of time, they will require a lot more of that drug to experience the same high. This is due to the excess dopamine in the postsynaptic terminal. This long-term stimulation can lead to the brain shutting these receptors down. Meanwhile, quitting drugs can lead to withdrawal symptoms, such as anxiety, mood swings, sexual dysfunction, etc., etc. Fortunately, these substance abuse disorders can be treated through various different treatments, such as cognitive behavior therapy and group meetings like Alcoholics Anonymous. Relapsing does occur, where you go back to your old habits of taking the drug, but that's part of the process. CBT, especially, as well as group meetings and going through detox, that's going to help you get through all this. So there's always a way out when you get addicted to drugs. But enough about drugs. Let's move on to attention. Divided attention is when we split our thought processes and split them between several different tasks instead of doing both them at the same time. We do them sequentially, sorry. When we switch, we're exercising our selective attention, which is split into two different types. Exogenous cues are cues that we don't have to tell ourselves to look for. These will be like bright colors or loud sounds. Endogenous cues do require our internal knowledge. An example of this is the cocktail party effect. The cocktail party effect is a phenomenon where someone will hear our name being called from a specific voice, even if they are in a large, disruptive location. So that's something like a cocktail party. Inattentional and change blindness are different yet related concepts. Inattentional blindness is when we don't notice something in our visual field, when our attention is directed somewhere else. While change blindness is when we don't notice changes in our environment. The spotlight model of attention expands on selective attention by stating that we take in several stimuli from our senses. But we don't pay attention to everything. We are aware of things on an unconscious level, and we need to be exposed to a stimulus in order to recognize another stimulus. This is called priming. The research or the resource model of attention basically states that we have a limited amount of resources to dedicate to attention, and we can't take everything in. Now, lastly, multitasking. It's self-explanatory, but it has three different concepts that modulate it. The more similar tasks are to each other, the harder it is to multitask. The harder a task is, the harder it is to multitask while doing that task. And with more practice, it becomes easier to perform two tasks. I didn't switch the slides in time, so I'll go over spotlight model of attention one more time. Basically, yeah, it expands on your selective attention. You're taking in several different stimuli from all your senses, but you're not paying attention to all of it. It's all unconscious, but once you need to call toward the conscious, you have to be exposed to a stimulus to recognize it. Take note of what I said before about priming. That's going to be very important for pretty much everything we cover about psychology in the future. Now, our last major topic, I believe, is going to be memory. Our memory can be broken into two parts: long-term memory and short-term or working memory. Working memory takes in verbal information and processes them through the phonological loop. Visual and spatial information enter the visual spatial sketchpad, while visual and verbal information go through the central executive buffer. Now, I want you guys to know that we can take in usually 7 plus or minus 2 items whenever we're trying to memorize something or going through or using our working memory. This is how much we can store in it, and that would be later we'll use that to process and encode it into our long-term memory. Now, this 7 plus or minus 2 rule is what essentially explains the primacy and recency effects, which state that we tend to memorize the first or last terms of a series better than the middle terms. The dual coding hypothesis states that it is easier to remember words if they're associated with images. Next up, we have long-term memory. Long-term memory is basically infinite. I'm so sorry. It's basically infinite, and it can be recalled whenever we need it. There are several types of long-term memory, split between explicit and implicit memories. Episodic memories are memories of specific events, while semantic memories are essentially recollections of facts. Procedural memories are memories of how to do specific tasks, and we've already discussed priming. Don't worry about emotional conditioning just yet. Moving on to encoding strategies, I want to start off by saying that rote rehearsal is the worst. It's the worst way to encode memory into your long-term memory. Chunking is essentially grouping terms into memorizable groups of 7 plus or minus 2, like we discussed before. Mnemonics are acronyms or sayings that help you to remember difficult concepts. You guys are probably familiar with that because that's how you're going to be studying for the MCAT. But self-referencing is related to the information, is relating the information to you in some way. And lastly, spacing is learning something and then recalling it at a later time. So this is usually how everybody studies, and this is the best way to encode your memory. So you learn this now, you look back at this a few days later, and you'll be recalling a lot more of this video. So yeah, for this course and just studying for the MCAT in general, I recommend spacing more than anything else here, except maybe mnemonics. Mnemonics are also pretty useful. Retrieval cues. These are how you recall a memory. Context is when the environment affects your recollection. State-dependent memories claim that if you are drunk and learn something, you'll recall that memory when you are drunk next. That being said, please do not get drunk and study for the MCAT. You can stay sober and recall this when you're sober later, too. That being said, moving on, let's talk about free recall. This is essentially the primacy and recency effects, while cued recall is basically getting a hint of some sort of I'm so sorry. It's basically just getting a hint in order for your brain to think in the right direction. Recognition, also pretty self-explanatory. It's essentially basically if you see an answer choice that you know is correct, you'll be picking that answer choice. Priming we already discussed, so I won't be going over that. But lastly, let's talk about memory decay and interference. Over time, we do eventually forget things that aren't encoded into our long-term memory. And this occurs in a shape like this. It's called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. There are two types of interference that messes with our memory. Let's talk about proactive interference, which is when something that we learned in the past impairs with our future learning. Retroactive interference is when new learning is impairing with old information. Aging also affects our memory. Semantic memory, crystallized intelligence, emotional processing, these all improve as we grow older, while recall, episodic memories, and processing speed will decline. Alzheimer's disease and Korsakoff's disease, they both cause memory loss, but they're slightly different. So let's talk about it. Alzheimer's is probably the one that we're most familiar with, and this is caused by amyloid plaque buildup in the brain. Make sure you know this, because that's pretty much the only physical term that they will give you for Alzheimer's in the MCAT. There's no real cure for Alzheimer's, but there is. You can delay it by obtaining a higher education or working jobs that require higher brain function. So basically, just work your brain out and you'll be less susceptible to Alzheimer's as you grow older. Korsakov's is the result of alcoholism and a lack of thiamine and is characterized by confabulations, or made-up memories. Now, I also want you guys to remember that the thiamine, because that's also pretty much the only like physical thing that you'll be able to notice if you see this on the MCAT. Anyways, damage to Wernicke's area is considered a precursor, and prevention of this disease is connected to eating thiamine and abstaining from alcohol. Now, lastly, amnesia is memory loss. Retrograde amnesia is inability to recall old memories, while anterograde amnesia is the inability to make new memories. Alright, so that's basically all I have for you guys here. We've covered memory, attention, drugs, dreams, and sleep. One thing I want you guys specifically to focus on would definitely be memory. This is probably very high yield. I also want you guys to focus on this reward pathway. I also said this is high yield. Other than that, I mean, obviously study everything. But yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. This was a pretty dense subject. I hope you guys are able to cover everything you need. If not, feel free to ask me any questions. Have a good rest of your day, and happy studying.